Seeing mixed-race children among the children of black slaves confused white women. They knew that the children of the male and female black slaves they owned had to be black, yet who were these mixed-race children with slightly lighter skin tones? That was when they discovered the sexual relationships their white husbands had engaged in with black slaves. Using threats and fear, their white husbands treated the black slaves as property with which they could do anything. However, little did they know that their white wives were thinking of doing the same to punish their husbands. Since white women owned slaves, most of whom were black men, they thought of something repulsive. What horrible and disgusting acts would white women commit that continue to shame white men to this day? Let's learn more about this in this video from the Black History Archive. Curiously, there are few accounts detailing the involvement of white women in slavery, and this was intentionally done to avoid the shame that haunts white men to this day. White women actively participated in the slave economy rather than merely observing from the sidelines. They were involved in the buying, selling, and owning of slaves, with about 40% of slave owners being white women. The more slaves a woman owned, the more influence and authority she wielded. Therefore, fathers often bequeathed more slaves than land to their daughters, closely tying slave ownership to the identity of Southern white women. This was because, after marriage, land would go to their husbands, but the slaves were usually kept by the women. Before the Civil War, American white women faced considerable restrictions on their freedoms. They were denied the right to vote and were effectively absorbed into their husband's authority upon marriage, essentially becoming their husband's property. Their mobility and freedom were severely restricted, often controlled through abuse. Despite enduring mistreatment and infidelities, women were expected to maintain a cheerful, obedient, and loyal demeanor. They actively participated in the slave trade, owning multiple slaves to maintain their social status. Legal battles were fought to retain slave ownership, with many white women prevailing in court due to the belief that slavery equaled freedom. While historians previously downplayed the role of white women in slavery, recent research has provided a more detailed understanding. Accounts collected through initiatives like the Federal Writers Project shed light on the lived experiences of black individuals. These narratives reveal that white girls were indoctrinated from a young age into the practices of controlling and owning enslaved people. This deeply ingrained mindset perpetuated the cycle of slavery across successive generations in the pre-war South. Many young women learned about social norms from close family members, including female relatives like cousins, friends, mothers, and grandmothers. They understood that when they acquired property, it would typically be transferred to their husbands upon marriage, unless they took proactive steps to retain control. Thus, these young women were taught the importance of safeguarding their wealth, regardless of their husband's future abilities. As white women reached maturity and became eligible to own slaves, their elevated social status granted them significant authority over these individuals. This allowed them to exert control over the lives of those they owned, sometimes resorting to verbal or physical exploitation. Southern households sought to mimic the hierarchical structure of slave society, desiring to acquire more servants at reduced costs. Growing up during this era, white girls witnessed their parents exercising control over their black slaves and learned to imitate their behavior. They were taught to adopt a strategic and calculated approach, fully understanding the consequences of their actions. Historical sources vividly illuminate life during that time. For instance, the book They Were Her Property recounts cases like that of Lizzie Anab Burwell, a 3-year-old girl who demanded that her father harm a black slave and acquire new maids for her. Parents often granted additional slaves to their daughters, effectively transferring ownership to them. By subscribing to our channel and liking the video, we aim to build a strong community, and we need your support. Let's continue now. Legally, married women were not recognized as property owners due to the doctrine of coverture, which merged the legal identity of married couples under the husband's authority. However, despite women's limited legal and political position, they employed various strategies to assert control over property, including prenuptial agreements before marriage and legal instruments such as trust deeds and gifts. In Louisiana, women could establish separate marital estates if their husbands demonstrated improved financial management. Essentially, the pre-war South operated under two concurrent systems: a patriarchal structure and a framework that granted white women legal and financial influence, despite the limitations imposed by coverture. Southern families found ways to bypass or ignore these limitations, allowing women to exercise power over property and, consequently, over their black slaves. During the 19th century, a misconception prevailed about white women, portraying them as delicate and protected individuals, confined to the home and shielded from the harsh realities of the outside world. However, historical evidence from various sources refutes this notion, revealing the active participation of white women in the slave markets of that time. Despite the prevalence of slavery, women participated in the buying and selling of black slaves, often arranging transactions within their local social circles from the comfort of their own homes. Due to their significant influence, white women played a crucial role in shaping a distinct market for enslaved wet nurses. Some felt compelled to separate black women from their families to care for their own children. Reports suggest that white women, particularly those who had frequent childbirths, viewed enslaved black women as a solution to alleviate their domestic burdens. Depending on their financial status, white women had the flexibility to hire, borrow, or purchase enslaved wet nurses, allowing them the freedom to socialize while others cared for their newborns. Unfortunately, not all white women treated their slaves with compassion. Some displayed extreme brutality, requiring the intervention of their husbands. Wealthy white women often invested in enslaved men and women to exploit them for reproductive purposes, thereby increasing their slave population. Historical records document cases where white women forced black male slaves into sexual relations. Although the nature of these relationships varied, they typically involved coercion, manipulation, and the inherent power imbalances in the master-slave dynamic. Some white female slave owners engaged in sexual relationships with their black male slaves to assert dominance and control. They used their position as slave owners to pressure or force the slaves into sexual encounters, exploiting their vulnerability and lack of autonomy. These relationships were often non-consensual and driven by the white women's desire for power and personal satisfaction. But here's something to pay attention to. During slavery, black slaves were not considered human and were therefore not allowed to approach or touch their white masters. The contempt was too great. However, curiously, white women ignored this contempt due to their sexual desires. Black slaves were not only allowed to approach, but also to touch and have sexual relations with white women, showing a completely different side. Some white slaveholders maintained sexual relationships with black slaves to satisfy their desires or seek companionship. Although there may have been cases of genuine affection or emotional attachment, these relationships were fundamentally unequal, shaped by the racial hierarchies of the time. The nature of these relationships led to various activities depending on the circumstances. Some encounters took place in secret, hidden from public view due to the social taboo surrounding interracial relationships. There were secret rooms where white women would go and call black slaves to be with them. However, in other cases, these relationships were more overt. White women openly took black slaves as sexual partners or even maintained long-term romantic relationships with them. Regardless of the details, It is crucial to recognize that these relationships were deeply rooted in the exploitation and dehumanization inherent in the institution of slavery. They exemplify the broader system of oppression that allowed white slave owners to dominate the bodies and lives of Black people, perpetuating a legacy of trauma and injustice that continues to affect society today. Sexual exploitation represented a heartbreaking aspect of the abuses suffered by Black slaves, often inflicted by wealthy white women. Despite the prevailing idea that white women were passive or innocent, there were cases where they actively coerced Black slaves into non-consensual sexual encounters, taking advantage of their authority and domination. This reprehensible behavior perpetuated a vicious cycle of sexual violence and degradation, further dehumanizing the already oppressed. The autobiography of Harriet Jacob, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, offers a raw example of this type of exploitation, detailing how the daughters of plantation owners exploited vulnerable Black slaves under their control for sexual gratification. Jacob's account highlights the predatory nature of this behavior, which cannot be interpreted as consensual, but rather as sexual abuse. It underscores the widespread sexual control exercised by plantation mistresses and elite white women, reflecting the actions of their male counterparts. Additionally, white women employed threats of false rape accusations to impose their dominance over slaves and force them to comply with their desires. Several factors may have motivated this sexual exploitation, ranging from boredom or sexual frustration to an unconscious attempt to compensate for their lack of agency in other aspects of their lives. Considered their husband's property, plantation women faced significant limitations on their sexual autonomy compared to men. Sexually exploiting slaves may have provided them with a semblance of power and control in a society where they lacked agency. The lives of plantation mistresses were often marked by loneliness, sadness, and limited freedom. Married at a young age and left to fend for themselves on the plantations while their husbands were away, they struggled with isolation and sought ways to exercise control over their limited lives. Furthermore, the expectation of remaining obedient despite their husbands' infidelities with slaves compounded their suffering. In essence, Southern women were disguised prisoners, trapped by social norms and patriarchal structures that relegated them to subordinate roles. Establishing sexual relationships with strong Black slaves allowed them to enjoy their lives and silently punish their husbands. After the Civil War ended, many white women tried to maintain control over working conditions by negotiating with newly freed Blacks. One strategy they employed was taking the children of these young African Americans as apprentices. Although apprenticeship was considered an improvement over slavery, it fell short of offering true freedom. Former slaves often worked under the same master or mistress as before, with meager wages and a predetermined period of service. Many apprentices ended up serving the same people who had once owned them, resulting in minimal improvements in their overall quality of life. What do you think? Why do you believe white women engaged in such unpleasant actions with their Black slaves? Was it to feel a sense of authority, or to seek a better sexual life because their white husbands often lacked what Black slaves possessed? In the comments section below, share your thoughts on whether similar practices exist today with slight differences. Would you like us to create more videos? If so, support us by subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell icon. You can also watch more videos on our channel. Hello everyone! Are you ready for an amazing adventure? Today we are going to a magical and mysterious place, Mongolia. Imagine a country located in the heart of Central Asia, surrounded by endless steppes and imposing mountains. A place where the nomadic tradition is still alive and where history is breathed in every corner. That's Mongolia. This fascinating country holds secrets and curiosities that have captivated travelers from all over the world. Get ready to discover the cultural richness of Mongolia, a unique blend of history, adventure, and tradition. Mongolia, in its golden age, was the largest and most powerful empire ever seen, commanded by the legendary Genghis Khan. His legacy lives on in the nomadic tradition, a way of life that follows the rhythm of nature and the migration of herds. Mongolian culture is rich and diverse, full of practices and beliefs that make it unique. For example, the Mosuo tribe, where women freely choose their partners in traveling marriages, demonstrates Mongolia's ability to preserve its customs in an ever-changing world. And there are even more surprises. Did you know that in Mongolia, marriage by abduction is still practiced? An ancient tradition that we will explore later. But Mongolia is not limited to its fascinating past. Its landscapes are simply breathtaking. From the imposing Gobi Desert, with its endless dunes and unique rock formations, to Lake Hobol, known as the Blue Pearl for its unique beauty. Prepare to be amazed. Mongolia's history dates back thousands of years, when nomadic tribes roamed the steppes and grasslands, living by hunting, fishing, and animal husbandry. Over time, these tribes united under the leadership of legendary figures such as Genghis Khan, who founded the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. Under his rule, the empire expanded at astonishing speed, conquering a territory stretching from Eastern Europe to East Asia. To give you an idea, the Mongol Empire became larger than Russia, China, and India combined. Impressive! Genghis Khan's empire was characterized by its military might, vast trade network, and religious tolerance, making it one of the most influential empires in history. His figure is still revered in Mongolia to this day. Leaving behind the glorious past, let's enter present-day Mongolia, starting with its capital, Ulaanbaatar. This city is not only the largest city in Mongolia, but also holds the title of the world's largest capital in terms of area. To give you an idea, the whole of Luxembourg would fit inside Ulaanbaatar. Mongolia's vastness is reflected in its low population density, only 2 people per square kilometer. Despite being larger than Peru, Mongolia has a much smaller population. This is largely due to the nomadic lifestyle that many Mongolians still maintain. In winter, Ulaanbaatar is transformed into a magical place, covered in snow and with a clear sky revealing a myriad of stars. The city invites you to enjoy winter activities such as skiing, snowboarding, and ice skating. Its markets are filled with handicrafts, yak wool clothing, and delicious local dishes to combat the cold. Speaking of food, we cannot forget the exquisite Mongolian ice cream, a tradition that dates back to the time of the warriors. Legend has it that to combat the scorching heat of the desert, a warrior mixed fresh snow with mare's milk to create this delicious delicacy. And if we are talking about unique flavors, Mongolia surprises us with sheep's eye juice, a traditional drink that is said to combat hangovers. Prepared with tomato juice, vinegar, and, as its name suggests, sheep's eyes. This drink is highly appreciated for its particular flavor and its alleged health benefits. But back to the natural wonders of Mongolia. The endless steppes, which extend over most of the territory, are home to nomads and their herds. Here, authentic Mongolian culture comes alive, surrounded by peace and natural beauty. And what about the Gobi Desert, one of the largest and most arid deserts in the world? Its golden dunes, hidden oases, steep canyons, and unique rock formations make it a fascinating destination. Mongolia is also a paradise for dinosaur lovers. Millions of years ago, this land was home to these prehistoric creatures, and their fossil remains have been exceptionally well preserved thanks to the arid climate. Imagine finding a Tyrannosaurus rex skeleton or fossilized dinosaur eggs. But it is not all desert in Mongolia. In the north, Lake Lag Jalat, with its crystal clear waters and lush vegetation, offers a haven of peace and the opportunity to observe migratory birds. And the Kurlan River, one of the longest in the country, meanders between steppes and mountains, creating dreamlike landscapes. It is important to remember that the climate in Mongolia can be extreme. Winter temperatures can drop as low as -30 degrees Celsius, so it is essential to dress warmly if you visit the country at that time of year. Among the must-see attractions in Mongolia is the equestrian statue of Genghis Khan, the largest in the world. Located in Sonjin Boldog, this impressive 40-meter-high sculpture is a tribute to the legendary Mongol leader. Despite its extreme climate, Mongolia is known as the Land of Blue Sky, thanks to its 260 sunny days a year. A curious fact that adds a special charm to this unique country. The main religion in Mongolia is Tibetan Buddhism, although there are also other beliefs such as shamanism and Tengrism. The first Buddhist temple in the country dates back to the 16th century, and since then, the religion has left an indelible mark on Mongolian culture. Let us now delve into the fascinating nomadic life of Mongolia. Can you imagine waking up every morning in a yurt, surrounded by majestic mountains and unspoiled nature? This is the reality for many Mongolians who keep their ancestral tradition alive. Nomadic life revolves around animal husbandry. Horses, sheep, goats, yaks, and camels are essential to their livelihood, providing food, milk, wool, and transportation. Mobility is key for Mongolian nomads. They move constantly in search of fresh pasture for their animals, following a migratory pattern that varies with the seasons. In spring and summer, they camp in the mountains, while in autumn and winter, they seek refuge in the valleys. The yurt, their traditional home, is a circular, portable structure made of wool, felt. Easy to assemble and disassemble, the yurt is warm and cozy, perfect for nomadic life. This way of life has given rise to unique traditions, such as the traveling marriages of the Mosuo tribe, where women freely choose their partners and children grow up with their mothers and maternal uncles. Another ancient tradition is the marriage by abduction, although it is now forbidden by law. In the past, a man could abduct the woman he wanted as a wife in order to marry her. And we cannot forget the impressive hunting with eagles, an ancient practice that still survives in the Altai region. Hunters train real eagles to hunt wild animals such as foxes and rabbits. Yet another example of the Mongolian people's connection with nature. Mongolia's most important festival, Nadam, celebrates the country's warrior tradition, with wrestling, archery, and horse racing competitions. A vibrant and colorful spectacle not to be missed if you visit Mongolia in July. As you have seen, Mongolia is a country full of surprises and wonders, a place where history and tradition merge with natural beauty, creating a unique experience for those who dare to discover it. Dare to explore the magic of Mongolia. Throughout history, monarchs have engaged in many bizarre and sometimes shocking practices. From sleeping with the bodies of saints to testing their bed linens for poison with kisses, these rulers were often deeply entrenched in strange customs, some born out of security concerns, others from superstition or tradition. While some of these practices may seem unthinkable today, they offer a glimpse into the peculiar lives of historical figures such as Queen Elizabeth I, King Henry VII, and others. Queen Elizabeth I, the perfectionist, and her unusual beauty regimen. Queen Elizabeth I was a well-known perfectionist, especially when it came to her image. Despite the many portraits made of her, Elizabeth only approved a few, destroying those that did not flatter her. Her Secretary of State, Robert Cecil, once remarked that no painter could capture her beauty accurately, So she ordered that no more portraits be made until an artist could create one that others could copy. She even forbade the display of ugly portraits until they were improved. Elizabeth's physical appearance took a drastic hit after contracting smallpox in 1562, leaving her face scarred. To hide these scars, Elizabeth resorted to makeup made from hazardous materials. She used a foundation called ceruse, a mixture of white lead, vinegar, and occasionally arsenic. This toxic concoction gave her a ghostly white complexion, which was considered a mark of beauty and purity in that era. Over this, she applied vermilion, a bright red pigment made from mercury, to add color to her cheeks and lips. Although this makeup helped her maintain her public image, it slowly poisoned her. By applying these toxic materials daily, she likely shortened her life by several years. The Virgin Queen. Why Elizabeth never married. One of the most intriguing aspects of Elizabeth, the first reign, was her decision to remain unmarried. Known as the Virgin Queen, she resisted countless pressures to marry, despite being frequently urged to do so by her advisors and Parliament. Many believed that marrying would provide the kingdom with political stability and an heir to the throne. In 1566, Parliament tried to force Elizabeth's hand by withholding funds, but she famously declared, "I am already bound into a husband, which is the Kingdom of England." After this, the issue was never raised again. Elizabeth had several reasons for refusing to marry. If she married a foreign prince, it could weaken England's independence, and if she married an Englishman, it might lead to factional conflicts among her ministers. Nonetheless, Elizabeth skillfully used the prospect of marriage to her advantage. She entertained many suitors, but kept them waiting, ensuring that she remained at the center of European diplomacy without giving up any of her power. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess. Elizabeth Bathory, often considered one of history's most notorious female serial killers, was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Bathory, born into a prominent family, was initially betrothed to a nobleman, but she quickly developed a reputation for cruelty. By the time she was 43, rumors began to spread about her sadistic tendencies. She was accused of torturing and murdering young girls, often from her own household or local villages. According to legend, she believed that bathing in the blood of young girls would preserve her youth and beauty. Witnesses recounted horrifying stories of Bathory's brutal methods, which included stabbing, biting, burning, and starving her victims. Some reports even claimed that she drank their blood or used it in beauty treatments. While some aspects of these stories may have been exaggerated over time, her crimes were severe enough to warrant an investigation. In 1610, Bathory was arrested, and although she was never put on trial due to her noble status, she was imprisoned in her own castle, where she died 4 years later. The royal tradition of cousin marriages. Marrying within the family was a common practice among European royals, often used to solidify alliances and maintain pure bloodlines. Despite the genetic risks of inbreeding, this tradition persisted well into modern times. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, for example, were first cousins, sharing the same grandfather, Francis, Duke of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Their marriage, while politically advantageous, contributed to the spread of genetic disorders, such as hemophilia, within European royal families. Even in recent history, cousin marriages were not uncommon among royals. King George V and Queen Mary were second cousins, while Prince Charles and Princess Diana were distantly related, being seventh cousins once removed. Although the practice has become less frequent in contemporary royal families, it has left a lasting legacy of health issues among Europe's aristocracy. King Henry VII is paranoia. Kissing away poison. King Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty, was notorious for his extreme paranoia about assassination, particularly by poison. He employed food tasters to test his meals, but he also feared that poison could be absorbed through his skin. To protect himself, Henry ordered his servants to kiss his bed linens each morning after making his bed, ensuring that they had not been laced with poison. Similarly, his son Edward's clothing was subjected to thorough inspections before he wore it. New garments had to be washed and aired out in front of a fire to remove any potential toxins. Even Edward's chamber pot cushion was tested for poison. Bathing, a rare luxury for monarchs. In many royal households, bathing was considered dangerous, and as a result, some monarchs bathed infrequently. Queen Isabella of Spain famously claimed to have bathed only twice in her entire life. Queen Elizabeth I was known to bathe once a month, whether she needed it or not. Her successor, King James II and I, took it even further and reportedly never bathed at all. His aversion to water was so intense that his courtiers complained of lice infestations in the rooms he frequented. Sleeping with saints, the Spanish royals' bizarre healing ritual. The Spanish royal family took their devotion to religion to an extreme by sleeping with the relics of saints. Whenever a member of the royal family was gravely ill, doctors would bring the bones or body parts of saints from churches and place them in bed with the patient. The idea was that these holy relics would invoke divine healing powers and cure the sick. While this practice seems macabre by modern standards, it reflects the deep religious faith that permeated every aspect of royal life during this period. The lives of historical monarchs were often filled with rituals and practices that seem strange, if not horrifying, to us today. Whether it was Queen Elizabeth I poisoning herself with makeup, Elizabeth Bathory's gruesome quest for eternal youth, or the Spanish royals sleeping with saints, these bizarre habits reveal the complex and often superstitious nature of royal life. Despite their wealth and power, monarchs were not immune to fear of poison, illness, or even aging. These anxieties led them to adopt practices that, while aimed at ensuring their survival or securing their legacy, often had the opposite effect. The stories of these royals remind us that life behind palace walls was not always as glamorous as it appeared. In fact, many of these practices reveal a deep sense of insecurity and vulnerability, masked by the grandeur of royal ceremonies and traditions. As we look back on the lives of these rulers, we can appreciate the oddities that defined their reigns, even as we are grateful for the advances in medicine, hygiene, and governance that have made such practices a thing of the past. Please, enter the beautiful and elegant Palace of Versailles, the epicenter of royal French etiquette in the 17th and 18th centuries. Imagine walking through these grand halls and witnessing the most powerful people of the time, showcasing their wealth and status through intricate social rituals and rules. Etiquette was not just a way of life. It was a way to maintain order and power in a society where every move was scrutinized. But let's be real, some of these rules were downright bizarre. How bizarre, you ask? Well, let's say that peeing directly in front of queens was, at one point, considered acceptable. Yes, you heard that right. So buckle up, grab your popcorn, and prepare for a magnificent tour through the fascinating world of royal French etiquette. Before we dive into the main content of the video, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Now, let's get started. The importance of etiquette at Versailles. Why would anyone bother with such an elaborate system of etiquette? Well, in Versailles, etiquette was everything. It was the foundation that upheld social order and demonstrated power and wealth. To be someone at Versailles, you had to know the rules and play the game. One of the most important rules was greeting the king and queen. You had to follow specific protocols, including bowing, curtsying, and never turning your back on the monarchs. In fact, walking backward was an accepted way of showing respect. If you messed up, well, Let's say it wouldn't be pretty. Mealtimes were another area where etiquette reigned supreme. Forks, knives, and spoons were placed in precise positions, and using the wrong utensil was considered a grave offense. Heaven forbid you accidentally drop a piece of bread on the floor. It was said that even the rats in Versailles wouldn't touch it. Of course, dressing the part was also essential. From elaborate wigs to extravagant gowns, everything had to be just right. One French queen, Marie Antoinette, was known for wearing towering hairstyles that could reach over 3 feet tall. But let's not forget the funny side of it all. Did you know that farting was considered a sign of good health and wealth at Versailles? That's right. The louder, the better. And if you had the privilege of using the royal chamber pot, you were living the dream of every courtier. So, if you ever find yourself in Versailles, make sure to eat your beans and show off your flatulence. In Versailles, women were crucial in maintaining the strict social order. The queen was expected to embody grace and elegance, and her ladies-in-waiting assisted her in every aspect of her life. Women were expected to behave in a certain way in both public and private settings. They always had to be calm, collected, and poised, never showing emotions or speaking out of turn. Even a simple gesture like a yawn could be seen as a sign of disrespect toward the queen. There are stories of one queen's ladies-in-waiting using an elaborate system of hand signals to communicate gossip and juicy details about their fellow courtiers. Rumor has it that one lady-in-waiting was so devoted to her queen that she slept on a mat outside her bedroom door, just in case she was needed in the middle of the night. Of course, the queen herself was not exempt from the rules of etiquette. Her every move was closely monitored and scrutinized. One queen, Marie-Thérèse, was known for never removing her gloves in public, even while eating. If a lady-in-waiting accidentally spilled something on the queen's gown, it was said that the offender would be punished by having to wash the entire garment with her own hands. For instance, did you know that the queen's toilet was a highly coveted event? Women would compete for the honor of attending, and if you were lucky enough to be chosen, you could gain significant social status. Overall, women played a crucial role in the intricate social system of Versailles, both as representatives of their families and as key players in the court's political machinations. Regarding matters of the heart in Versailles, there were strict rules to follow. Courtship was a delicate dance, with potential suitors navigating a complex web of social expectations and family obligations. For starters, there were rules around dating. Young ladies and gentlemen were expected to adhere to a strict code of conduct when interacting with one another. For example, it was considered improper for a gentleman to approach a lady directly without first being introduced by a mutual acquaintance. Once a couple had been properly introduced, there were still rules. Physical contact was frowned upon, with couples expected to keep a respectable distance from one another. If a gentleman wanted to express his interest in a lady, he had to do so subtly and indirectly, often through flowers or small gifts. Marriage was the ultimate goal of courtship in Versailles. However, choosing a spouse went beyond love and attraction. Families often used their children's marriages to cement political alliances, secure financial gain, or improve social standing. As a result, the choice of a spouse was often left up to the parents or other family members rather than the couple themselves. Even after a match had been made, there were still rules to follow. The bride and groom were expected to exchange formal vows in a public ceremony, with witnesses present to ensure the union was legally binding. But what about affairs? Despite the strict rules around marriage and courtship, extramarital affairs were not uncommon in Versailles. They were often seen as a way to assert dominance and display one's power or sense of self-love and pride. In this environment, even the language of love was highly codified. Love letters were often written in secret code, with lovers using symbols and references to convey their true feelings, without arousing suspicion. And if you wanted to break up with someone in this high society, you couldn't just ghost them. You had to write a formal rejection letter, citing a plausible excuse for ending the relationship. There are stories of famous courtesans, like Madame de Pompadour, who used their wit and charm to capture the heart of King Louis XV. In Versailles, clothing was more than just a way to cover your body. It was a way to display your wealth, status, and taste. Clothing was a form of art, and the most elaborate and luxurious outfits were reserved for the highest members of the court. Fashion trends in Versailles constantly changed, and the nobles always looked for new and innovative ways to show off their style. Women's fashion was particularly elaborate, with ornate dresses, huge wigs, and high shoes. The dresses were made from expensive fabrics such as silk and satin, and were often embellished with lace, ribbons, and jewels. Men's fashion was also very elaborate, focusing on the coat and waistcoat. These garments were often made from luxurious fabrics like silk or velvet, and were decorated with embroidery, lace, or metal buttons. The waistcoat worn underneath was often even more ornate than the coat itself. Strict dress codes and fashion etiquette in Versailles were taken very seriously. The rules varied depending on the occasion, and there were strict guidelines for what to wear at different events. For example, men were expected to wear a coat, waistcoat, breeches, stockings, and a wig at formal court events, while women were expected to wear an elaborate dress and towering hair. Fashion and clothing played an enormous role in the social world of Versailles. Clothing was not only a form of art, but also a means of communication. Even in this highly formal setting, there were hilarious moments to be found. So, there you have it. The wild world of royal French etiquette at Versailles. We've learned that manners were everything, whether it was peeing in front of the queen or wearing the right shoes.